Peter is a critically acclaimed author of The Accidental Superpower and The Absent Superpower, and his third and latest title is Disunited Nations, The Scramble for Power in an Ungoverned World, which became available in March 2020. And that's the reason, and I also follow him, his blogs, very interesting, very contrarian. But one thing really stood out, and that is really the reason, in fact, I told him, the reason that I wanted him to come to talk here was that such a person does not really talk about India at all till recently.
Coming to you from Colorado. My job today is to reset the conversation. There's a lot of discussion in the United States about our future in the world. There's a lot of discussion in India about its future as a major power. But we're all working from an understanding that is now 30 to 40 years out of date. So allow me to kind of reset the picture. At the end of World War II, the Americans created a new age, a new order, the first order of the world. In it, we told everyone that we would use our navies to patrol the global oceans so that everyone could go anywhere at any time, interact with any partner, participate in any supply system, bring any commodity home to produce any product, then send it out for export. It allowed the global system to develop as a containment strategy. We basically created this order. We paid everyone to be on our side. But the Cold War ended 30 years ago. And the Americans have been edging away from that system ever since. And without that security parameter of the Soviet foe, the Americans lost interest in maintaining the free trade order. Now, let's assume for the moment that the Americans decide that they want to carry this forward into the future. Well, maintaining a global system, maintaining a global order requires three things. First of all, it requires a political culture that is interested in that system. The second thing that you would need is a global military footprint to enforce the peace, to patrol the global waterways. This is total American troops stationed abroad since World War II. It's been trending down for decades. And the third thing that you would need to maintain a global system is global economic interests. And Americans have never had that. We have a continental economy, and if we had invested that economy into the wider world, then the global order would not have been a bribe. We would have just been another empire. Now, check out India. India never joined the global order. And so it never gained full access to the advantages of the order in capital, in industry, in technology. Economically, it is this decision not to join the global system that is the root of India's development lag. It was a choice. And culturally, it is this decision not to join the global order that is the root of Indians' inferiority complex, because everyone that Indians compare themselves to did join the order. But the order is now collapsing. And anyone who adapted themselves to benefit, for example, China, now has a lot to lose. But India? Sure. In India not joining, India lost an opportunity to rise. But in not joining, India is not condemned to fall with the rest. So that's our first big point. The structural issues that created the world that we understand, they're gone. And for India, that's fine, because India never joined that world. Next up, let's talk demographics. Now, what we've got here is a standard demographic profile. Children at the bottom, young adults, mature adults, retirees at the top, men on one side, women on the other. This is Mexico, and this is what we call a consumption-led system. Because anytime you have a lot of people below roughly age 40, it's all about the spending on kids, on cars, on homes, on higher education. It's what drives a modern system. Now, when American political and business leaders look at a demography like Mexico, we really like what we see. All those young people are relatively new into the workforce. They're relatively low value add. So the Mexicans excel at low and mid-skilled manufacturing and assembly. That's not what Americans do. Americans do the high end. We do the design. So the propensity for integration of these systems is huge. Second, all those young Mexicans consume a lot of products. So Mexico became America's largest trading partner in calendar year 2019, and it's a position they're going to maintain for pretty much the rest of our lives. The Koreans had a baby bust 40 years ago that they never recovered from. So they now have a lot of people in their 50s. Now, those folks have been at their jobs for literally decades, very skilled, very high value added, and going head to head with the American workforce. In addition, not a lot of Koreans in their 20s and 30s. So the Koreans have to export all that product. America will never have a trade surplus with the Koreans. Now, between approximately 1980 and 2015, the world was kind of in this beautiful demographic moment. All of the world's economies were either consumption or export led. Here's a number of them in the year 2000. More or less a perfect balance. But 20 years later, we are all 20 years older, and the picture's changed. The global demographic of high consumption has peaked, and it only can go down from here. As to the export-led economies, they're aging into mass retirement. The year 2022 is the year that most of the advanced world shifts into kind of a post-growth system. Now, in the United States, Americans are kind of a partial exception. And the generation that matters the most are our baby boomers. American investments give way to European investments, give way to Indian investments. The capital inflow from the world's boomer cadre is the single largest reason for India's growth surge for the past decade. And it's almost over, because in calendar year 2022, the majority of the world's baby boomers, Americans included, move into mass retirement. And when that happens, all of those far-reaching investments get liquidated. And it goes back into the most secure investments you can have, such as American government treasury bills and even cash. Because once you retire, you never add to your stack of investments. So the whole world right now is in its biggest capital glut ever. And it's over next year. And all of this was before coronavirus. Coronavirus has driven all the consumption-led systems offline and into recession at the same time. So if you're an exporting nation, it really doesn't matter if you can beat the virus because you have no one to sell to. Let's look at the comparison that everyone in India loves to make. Now here we've got India and China in the year 2000. But as we all know, the Chinese have a one-child policy. So you fast forward that today, and China has now the world's fastest aging demography. Best case scenario, assuming nothing else goes wrong, in the year 2100, there'll be fewer than half as many Chinese as there are today. In calendar year 2020, the Chinese birth rate collapsed, dropped by almost a quarter. And remember, it takes 9 months to have a kid. That means the birth rate in 2020 reflected 2019 conditions. They haven't had their coronavirus crash yet. Now look at India today. It's aging too. India might be resistant to deglobalization, but it's urbanized right alongside everyone else. India's birth rate began to contract 25 years ago, and that contraction sharply accelerated a decade ago. That means India in 2021 is aging at a similar rate to what China aged at back in 1980. That would suggest, in the worst case scenario, India still has 40 years of demographic dividends to reap. That's great. So that's our second big point. India faces little of the demographic pressure that plagues not just China, but most of the world. Now, that doesn't mean that there are no clouds in these silver linings. India has the world's worst sex imbalance. In 2030, there will be 50 million surplus men under 45, concentrated in the Hindu belt. That is a social and a political instability issue. If Indian women today think that there's issues in Indian gender relations now, I mean, look out. In consumption-based systems, having half your population exist is, in essence, a lower caste, has implications for technological progress, investment capacity, and, of course, consumption. For India, this contest between population and prosperity has always been an issue. My point is that in a world in which global capital supplies are about to collapse, this disconnect is going to sharpen.
You said something, today and in our earlier discussion that India will probably be in a very strong position to, safeguard the Middle East and the oil supplies to the Eastern Hemisphere. And, being from where we are, it looks good for us. But what about the Pakistan and the so-called CEPC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor? I mean, isn't that a land route which will be used by China?
First things first, I wouldn't use the word safeguard for the Middle East. That is definitely a business you do not want to get into. That is no fun at all. I would use the word arbitrate. You decide what goes and what doesn't, because you control the sea lanes. As for the Chinese-Pakistani axis, I fully realize why that's an obsession in India, but let me kind of underline something here. If we ever get to the point where the Chinese are capable of projecting power through that corridor into Pakistan, two things go wrong for the Chinese very, very quickly. Number one, they are treated to the same tender mercies that the Americans were when we tried to transit Pakistan. That's no fun. And number two, let's assume for the moment that the Pakistanis and the Chinese can sing kumbaya and all get along and they can pacify the Northwest Territories and all that good stuff. So you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese investment to stabilize it. You cause a few landslides and it's done. That is not a stable transit system.
Now, we've spoken about the Quad mechanism, US, Japan, Australia, India alliance. It's not really an alliance yet, but will it become a nation, NATO? 3 out of these 4 players are highly developed, rich nations. India stands out in contrast. Will such an alliance of disparities work beyond the common interest of just checking a surging China?
I don't think it'll ever be a military alliance in the traditional sense, because that requires a military player that is willing to act as coordinator, and the Americans are not really interested in that role. The American goal with the Quad is to get the other 3 countries collaborating where is feasible. I think that's going to make it more of a political alliance than a military one. Because of the 3 countries, Japan's the only one with an expeditionary military. The Australians definitely punch above their weight, but this is a country of 30 million people. They can only do so much. India is the country that has the most strategic flexibility and has the best strategic position. You don't need a blue water navy in order to secure everything that you need for your future. And because those 3 countries have such wildly different defense capabilities and needs, talking with one another is great, and that's probably all you need. But the idea that one of you can come to the military aid of the other 2, I think is a reach. That doesn't make this pointless, but it does definitely limit how far it can go.
Our conclave theme is, this is India's decade, 2021 to 2030. We want to know your remarks on how you see India performing in the decade ahead on the global stage, your view. Can you, from your vantage points, see and tell us 3 advantages that India can leverage this decade?
Let me start by saying that it's not India's decade. It's a lot more than a decade. And it's not a global stage. The global stage will be gone. So the idea of becoming a major global power is kind of irrelevant. India needs to focus on its region. Because I believe one of the previous speakers mentioned that 70% of global trade crosses through the Indian Ocean Basin. It only crosses through the Indian Ocean Basin if India allows it to. So you remove the Americans from the equation. Instead of having a single global stage, you have a lot of regional stages with limited interaction. India faces no major security threats. In fact, it has the capacity of choosing who to elevate and who to crush. Anyone who wants to get through, anyone who wants to get Persian Gulf crude, anyone who wants to be involved in European, East Asian trade, India is the only country that can allow that to happen. And to think that India can't take advantage of that is silly. So strategic positioning, honestly, it doesn't get much better than where you are. Second big advantage, most of the world is facing complete demographic collapse. India is one of only 6 countries with any level of development that is not. There are challenges within that, but not having to completely rewire the way your society and economy works because of the changes in the global system, changes that you can't affect. That's wonderful. And then third, you are one of about a dozen countries in the world that will not be facing an energy crisis. because anyone who wants to get crude out of the Persian Gulf has to go through you. And it will be very easy for you to either get your own energy or to basically charge protection money for anyone who decides that they want to still use Persian Gulf crude. You're looking at maybe 20 countries in the world with a reasonably positive demography, and only 12 that can keep the lights on without help. And you're in both categories. I mean, honestly, you can't generate these sort of advantages with policy. This is just kind of luck of where you physically happen to be.
Thanks. That's nice to hear. Now, you said, India was never deeply integrated into the global economy till a few years ago. And you pointed out as a short-term opportunity in a regionalizing world. How can, however, such a disengaged player emerge to be successful within the global economy in the long term? And that too,
there's not going to be a global economy, so I wouldn't aim for that. It's like, India is a major economy in and of itself. Most of the resources that it needs are either from the subcontinent itself or from Southeast Asia and Australia. Those connections are fine. The point here is that the rest of the world, everyone that India has always compared itself to, they're the ones that are facing the challenge because they're the ones who are having the rug pulled out from under them. That doesn't affect India. So in relative terms, they fall, India rises, and in absolute terms, India can continue growing. The biggest challenge that India is going to have for the next decade is getting used to a capital structure that is much more similar to the situation you had in the 1970s and the 1980s than what we've had in the 2010s. India knows how to operate with that. It won't be fun. Having half the capital at 4 times the cost is going to hurt.
Okay. Now, the world's leading market, US, is going to depend more on NAFTA. Your blogs say that you're going to be much more integrated with Mexico over the next few decades. And the world itself is moving to low labor-intensive manufacturing. And we, however, are a nation of, at best, semi-skilled at the larger population level. So over the short and medium term, with a financial crunch that you're talking about, how's the next 4 or 5 years, 10 years maybe, going to be for India? Is it going to be any better than now?
India is not a normal country. It's not a traditional nation state in the Westphalian sense. It's more like a loose association of different cultural regions, more like the Holy Roman Empire, if you will, which means that within India, there is substantial opportunity for parts of India that are at different stages of development to develop a kind of mini globalized system of manufacturing, with one part doing the higher end, one part doing the lower end, lots of integration, kind of like what the Americans do with Mexico. It's a model that works with the system you have, where you already have high-skilled and low-skilled manufacturing in the same country. Remember, this is a country of 1.5 billion people. There's a lot of variety, not just culturally, but economically. The biggest challenge India will face into taking advantage of that and operationalizing it as a manufacturing model is infrastructure. Again, it's a problem India knows, but if you can link those regions together with better road and rail, you can solve a lot of the problems that you're identifying here right at home.
But you said that the boomers population is going to suddenly go off in 2022, which means global, capital markets are going to suddenly flip over in 2022. And last year, we've also had a huge bull run. Indian stock markets have outperformed in the last 1 year since the strictest lockdown. It's mainly due to the liquidity glut. How long will this party last? And I know your answer, but what would you advise Indian investors in that context? And what else are the investment avenues for people today? Because, people are having a party here right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, let me start by saying I am not a financial analyst, so take this for what it is. But yes, I expect that a lot of the positions that the baby boomers in the developed world have, a lot of the baby boomer positions in the developed world are going to be liquidated, especially those that are in the developing world, and India is no exception there. So you should expect a significant pullback of foreign investment of all types from India over the course of the next year to 2 years. That is kind of baked into the situation right now. That will not be fun. But for domestic investors, so long as capital flows are unimpeded, and I think once we have a big pullback, capital controls are going to go up in large portions of the world, India included. But as long as those are not there, investing in the American market, if you're just looking for returns, is kind of a go-to. It's generally considered the lowest risk. And so we're already seeing money pour into the United States, despite the fact that we're engaging in deficit spending that is just atrocious in historical terms. But moving forward, as the foreign money dries up, the Indian economy, the Indian municipalities are going to have no choice but to issue their own debt in order to compensate for the lack of investment that comes in. So there'll be ample opportunities to invest in local infrastructure. And honestly, if you're the Indian federal government, that's exactly where you need it to go. That is, in my opinion, the single biggest challenge facing the Indian system. Because as the global system cracks apart, India is going to be more dependent on what it can do at home. And anything that improves connectivity throughout the subcontinent is something that is going to serve India for decades.
Do you think India may actually stand to gain from a collaborative relationship with China? You've spoken of their expected precipitous demographic slide. Can India use Chinese capital and open the Indian market to them and get to a win-win relationship with our neighbor? Hypothetically, will such a collaboration be viewed with caution by the US and the West?
We're coming to the conclusion in the United States that the Chinese story really is overblown. That's starting to kind of seep into the edges of American consciousness. It's certainly the dominant strain driving the Chinese right now. So there is one part where I don't think I'd use the word collaboration, but where India can certainly take advantage. Capital flight from China is already at epic levels, in excess of $1 trillion US a year. But in terms of broader cooperation, every country that has tried that, it's gone badly. The Chinese bring in their own workers to do the infrastructure. The Chinese do it with their own money, or they charge loans, and then you get left with something you might not necessarily need on the back end. Every state that has participated in the Belt and Road Initiative has, in the end, ultimately repudiated the debts. And the Chinese idea of a joint venture is, how about you pay for everything and we take all your technology? If India can break the mold and make that relationship work, India would be the first country to do so. So honestly, I would focus your energies elsewhere.